The Sector 47 9S Archives. Archive 2219. The Geometry Problem. Former Classification. Restricted. Pre-FTL Cultural Containment Division. There are few subjects that have generated more unnecessary paperwork than geometric patterns, appearing in agricultural fields. For decades, humanity debated their origin. Were they messages from extraterrestrial civilizations? Navigation markers? Mathematical proofs? Warnings about the future? Some even suggested they were attempts at communication. From beings so intellectually advanced that circles and spirals were the only language they considered worthy of using. I must admit, that last theory was rather flattering. Reality, however, was considerably less poetic. The official term within the division was unauthorized cultural markings. Not because they carried any cultural significance to us. Quite the opposite. The name existed because young people insisted they did. Every civilization eventually produces a generation. Convinced that established society has become unimaginative, overly regulated, and incapable of appreciating true art. Humanity was no exception. Neither, unfortunately, was the rest of the galaxy. Long before your ancestors began wondering whether mysterious circles represented messages from distant stars, similar incidents had already been documented on dozens of developing worlds. Rice fields, crystal forests, floating algae colonies, methane moss, even the frozen nitrogen plains of Kareth 12, had all, at one time or another, become canvases for rebellious young pilots with access to government survey equipment, and an inflated opinion of their artistic abilities. Naturally, someone had to deal with them. That responsibility belonged to one of the least prestigious offices ever created by the Galactic Union. The Office for Unauthorized Cultural Markings. No Academy graduate ever requested that assignment. Its investigators spent entire careers cataloging giant symbols that should never have existed, interviewing young suspects who insisted they were expressing mathematical freedom, and filling out forms explaining why yet another primitive civilization had mistaken juvenile vandalism for profound cosmic communication. The office employed experienced investigators, veterans, patient men and women who had spent decades chasing the same kind of offenders across hundreds of worlds. They dressed like exhausted civil servants rather than elite agents. Jackets strained slightly around the waist. Coffee containers seemed permanently attached to one hand, while the other carried folders thick enough to qualify as defensive equipment. Their greatest weapon was not advanced technology, but the weary expression of individuals who had seen this exact problem far too many times. One of them had a habit of examining a newly reported pattern for only a few seconds before sighing. Fractal society. Someone would inevitably ask how he could be so certain. Too much radial symmetry. The Spiral Collective never centers their work. He was never wrong. By the time the events of this archive took place, the Fractal Society had become something of a legend within the office. They considered themselves artists, mathematical idealists, explorers of symmetry. They rejected the accusation of vandalism entirely. As one of their members argued during a disciplinary hearing, "We don't flatten crops. We gently persuade them to cooperate with geometry." The tribunal unanimously agreed that the distinction had no legal value. Unfortunately, Earth turned out to be the perfect gallery. Large agricultural fields, very little aerial surveillance at night, a population fascinated by mysteries, and most importantly, a civilization fully capable of inventing explanations far more extraordinary than the truth. As was often the case in Sector 47 9S, what began as a minor disciplinary matter would eventually become one of humanity's most enduring mysteries. It would also require an infiltration operation involving two elderly gentlemen. A wooden plank several lengths of rope, and a remarkable amount of confidence. Part 2. They considered themselves artists. The office considered them repeat offenders. The disagreement had persisted for nearly 80 years. The Fractal Society was not an organized movement in the traditional sense. There was no leader, no headquarters, no political agenda, and certainly no revolutionary manifesto. Membership changed constantly as one generation graduated, found respectable careers, and was quietly replaced by another equally convinced that geometry could improve the universe. Their common language was mathematics. Most belonged to universities or scientific institutes. Several would later become respected engineers, physicists, and researchers. This complicated disciplinary hearings considerably. It is difficult to portray someone as a dangerous criminal when they arrive carrying research papers instead of weapons. Unlike human vandals who decorated walls with paint, the society refused to permanently damage anything. In fact, they considered property damage an indication of poor artistic discipline. Their preferred instrument was a compact gravitational survey craft, originally designed to allow ecological teams to examine fragile ecosystems without disturbing local vegetation. With only minor and entirely unauthorized software modifications, the same equipment could gently bend thousands of plants into astonishingly precise geometric formations. During one disciplinary hearing, an investigator asked whether the society understood the difference between scientific equipment and artistic tools. One student answered without hesitation, "The distinction is entirely bureaucratic." The tribunal unanimously disagreed. At first, Earth was simply another convenient location. Large agricultural fields, stable weather, very little nighttime aerial traffic, and most importantly, a civilization fascinated by unexplained mysteries. The first formations attracted almost no attention. Farmers blamed unusual weather. Agricultural experts blamed environmental conditions. The office fully expected the phenomenon to disappear before anyone became seriously interested. Instead, humans began photographing them, then measuring them, then publishing books about them. That was the moment everything went wrong. One member of the Fractal Society returned from an observation mission carrying several human magazines. According to his testimony, he placed them on the table during the Society's weekly meeting and quietly announced, "They think we're communicating with them." The room reportedly remained silent for several seconds. Then everyone began talking at once. One member appeared genuinely offended. "Communicating through circles? That would be artistically irresponsible." Another corrected him. "Technically, they're interpreting our exhibition without invitation." A third simply smiled. "We have an audience." Earth ceased to be merely another agricultural world. It became the most prestigious unauthorized exhibition venue in 3 neighboring sectors. Every successful formation was photographed, analyzed, published, measured, debated. Entire human conferences were organized around patterns that had originally been created because someone believed the spacing between 2 spirals could be improved by another 3 degrees. The society became increasingly ambitious. Simple circles evolved into elaborate fractals. Fractals evolved into nested symmetries. Nested symmetries evolved into designs requiring several hours of continuous flight, and levels of precision that even experienced survey pilots considered unnecessarily obsessive. Curiously, none of those increasingly complex formations contained messages. At least not for humanity. Every composition carried a signature, not written in letters, but hidden within tiny mathematical deviations. Almost impossible to notice unless one already understood the conventions used by unauthorized geometric artists. To human researchers, they appeared to be mysterious numerical relationships. To investigators from the office, They were as obvious as handwritten signatures beneath a painting. An investigator would spread aerial photographs across his desk, adjust his glasses, and quietly identify the author before anyone else had finished reading the location. Kaylee's. Someone would ask how he knew. Third spiral turns 2 degrees early. Another photograph. Lyrand. Too many recursive intersections. Another. Definitely students. By then, the office had already confiscated 3 survey craft, suspended 12 temporary flight licenses, and organized no fewer than 19 mandatory seminars, titled Respecting the Cultural Development of Pre-FTL Civilizations. Attendance remained consistently poor. The students argued that they had never intended to influence humanity. The office agreed. That, unfortunately, was precisely the problem. Humanity had influenced itself. Researchers searched for mathematical constants. Historians proposed forgotten civilizations. Journalists suggested secret military experiments. Philosophers debated cosmic intelligence. The Fractal Society, meanwhile, spent an entire evening arguing over whether a hexagonal transition should occur, before or after the 4th recursive layer. It was one of the few occasions in my career where both sides of a mystery were acting in complete sincerity. They simply happened to be discussing entirely different subjects. Part 3. The office quickly reached an uncomfortable conclusion. The Fractal Society was no longer the problem. Humanity was. The unauthorized markings had escaped their original context and acquired a life of their own. Scientists analyzed them. Journalists documented them. Television programs debated them. Authors filled entire libraries explaining patterns that, according to the original artists, had merely looked aesthetically unbalanced the night before. Confiscating another survey craft would accomplish nothing. Suspending another flight license would accomplish even less. The damage, if such a dramatic word could be justified, had already become cultural. A special meeting was convened. The director of the Pre-FTL Cultural Containment Division opened the discussion with a question. Can we erase the evidence? The answer came immediately.
No.
Can we recover the equipment? Already recovered. The director remained silent for a moment before asking the only question that still mattered. Can we convince them that nothing extraordinary happened? No one answered. Finally, one of the senior analysts carefully closed his folder. Not everyone. Another long silence followed. Then the director nodded. We don't have to. That sentence would later become required reading in the Containment Academy. The objective had never been to replace one certainty with another. The objective was uncertainty. A civilization that endlessly debats a mystery is considerably easier to manage than one convinced it has solved it. Operation Plausible Explanation was approved that same afternoon. The proposal itself was remarkably simple. If humanity insisted on seeking ordinary explanations, then the division would provide one. Not a perfect explanation, merely one that looked convincing enough to divide opinion. A search began for experienced field agents who had spent decades living among humans. The personnel office eventually identified 2 candidates. Both had served in Sector 47-9S for so long that they had become almost indistinguishable from the local population. Both had officially retired years earlier. Both enjoyed gardening. Neither was particularly enthusiastic about returning to active service. When informed of the assignment, one reportedly stared at the briefing documents for several minutes before asking, "You're telling me I spent 72 years protecting technological secrecy?" He looked up, "And now you want me to demonstrate farming?" His supervisor nodded. "With a wooden plank." The silence that followed was described in the official report as professionally disappointing. Several weeks later, the 2 retires publicly demonstrated. How surprisingly convincing geometric formations could be created. Using little more than rope, wooden boards, careful planning, and patience. The demonstration was entirely genuine. The circles they produced were real. The methods worked, at least for simpler designs. Human newspapers covered the story extensively. Television crews arrived. Photographs were published around the world. Exactly as predicted. Public opinion immediately divided into two equally confident groups. One declared the mystery solved. The other declared the demonstration part of the mystery. The division considered the operation an unquestionable success. The final containment report contained only 3 operational statistics. Population accepting the explanation, 49. Population rejecting the explanation, 51. Mission assessment successful. As one reviewer noted, absolute certainty had once again been successfully prevented. The members of the Fractal Society received disciplinary measures that disappointed everyone involved. No dramatic prison sentences. No legendary manhunts. Their flight privileges were suspended. Their survey equipment permanently confiscated. They completed mandatory cultural ethics seminars, during which they showed remarkably little interest in cultural ethics. One of them eventually accepted a position within the Office for Unauthorized Cultural Markings. According to personnel records, he spent the following 87 years identifying geometric signatures left by younger artists, convinced that their generation had invented mathematical rebellion. History, like bureaucracy, has a tendency to repeat itself. There was, however, one final development that no one inside the division had anticipated. Humans began making their own crop circles. Some were simple, some were surprisingly sophisticated. Others displayed an enthusiasm that compensated generously for their lack of geometry. For a brief period, investigators attempted to distinguish authentic unauthorized cultural markings from locally produced imitations. The effort proved exhausting. A budget review concluded that creating an entirely new department to classify circles made by extraterrestrial students and circles made by enthusiastic farmers represented an unreasonable administrative expense. The proposal was unanimously rejected. The existing uncertainty was judged entirely satisfactory. Even today, humans continue searching those fields for hidden messages. Advanced mathematics, warnings from distant civilizations, or evidence that someone, somewhere, was trying to communicate with Earth. They were correct about one thing. An intelligent civilization really had been responsible. It simply never occurred to them that the intended audience was not humanity, but a small group of young artists, arguing among themselves about whether the third spiral should have turned 2 degrees sooner.